Okay, everybody, I'm sorry about my temporary absence. Hi, so we're going to have a really fantastic afternoon. Something not specifically directed to this afternoon's program that I want to mention is that there is a book table, and there are publications available by two of the speakers, one being Larry List, the other Mark Nelson. And pre-COVID, we had a bookseller who sold books at the Penn Writers Conference. And we heartily believe in books. It is something we want to bring back. No books, no culture, we die, seriously. And bear with us, because finding a bookseller is not an easy thing to do. And parenthetically, we don't want any money. We just want them to sell the books. So if you know anybody, we are definitely looking. We want to have robust selection represented. And so that's one of the pre-COVID things we are striving to get back to. Some things we gladly give up. Anyway, I want to thank Erica, right there in the middle, for suggesting the idea of this panel, which I think is superb. And you're going to hear about the Western landscape historically and in the present, or as seen by artists and scholars, curators, etc., however we define people. And it's a perfect segue from this afternoon. And we're so delighted to welcome Sarah Ayala. Now, Sarah, do you do the third name or? Okay, well, I assume it's a recent marriage and a name change. So, but Sarah Ayala, who is an artist, and we'll hear of her work. Erica Doss from the University of Texas, and we love Erica. Just what can I say? I know it's not the most professional introduction, but I admire her greatly, and then we're also thrilled to have Don Stinson, who is another artist whose work you are going to learn about. So I will say not very much. And then finally, Andrew Walker. And as I said to him when I first spoke to him, I waited a long time for this, to work with him, because I remember trying to get him and he was always on some other project. So now finally, you have a new home.
Erica, it's all yours.
I think I'm mic'd. Can you hear me? No, not that well. Are you ready for micing? Mic fine? Who's turning it on? Yes? No? No. Do I turn it on?
We can hear you, but it's not very loud.
How do I turn it on?
Hello? Okay. Yeah, that woke you right up. All right, I'll try not to pop. Hi, everybody. Thanks for sticking around this afternoon. And welcome to Western Landscapes and American Art. And can I get the first slides? I do. Okay. Yep, we are professionals. Okay. Land and landscape. And okay, before I start, thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Aaron. Thanks all of you. And the way we're going to run this is I'm going to talk briefly, And then I'm going to introduce the folks who are really what this exhibit is all about. Two of the artists are here, and Andrew Walker is one of the curators of the exhibit. But I'm starting off with sort of an overview of Western landscape, more or less past or present. Okay, land and landscape are enduring subjects in American art. In the 19th century, landscape painting was an influential medium of nation building, identity formation, national allegiance, national pride. The new nation was envisioned as nature's nation, and much of this is what Kathy already talked about this morning, so there will be a little bit of repetition. A landscape where opportunity and success were inextricably linked to the Republic's terrestrial environment. Idealized pictures of seemingly infinite American wilderness, ranging from large-scale oils to mass-produced chromolithographs, invited settlement and colonization, and justified manifest destiny and continental expansion. Monumental canvases depicting the nation's unique natural wonders, like Moran's view of Green River, Wyoming, helped convey the idea of American exceptionalism. They also romanticized the West as a pre-modern, pre-industrial space devoid of the actual bridges and railroads that artists took to actually get there. Moran took the Union Pacific Railroad to reach Green River in 1871, but he deliberately excluded the town and the railroad in his Western landscape. And this is something that curator Nancy Anderson at the National Gallery of Art has written about extensively. The new nation was also imagined as a new Eden, a source of spiritual influence and instruction. For artists like Thomas Cole, landscape painting was a moral imperative, a means of conveying the virtue of being an American citizen in an Edenic nature blessed by divine providence. Drawing on the tenets of American transcendentalism, Cole and other Hudson River Valley artists romanticized the rolling hills, the rivers, and the mountains of eastern New York State, projecting an optimistic agrarian habitat where nature was a conduit to God. The nature-based theology of Cole's moralizing landscapes, most notably his Course of Empire series at the New York Historical, warned about the dire consequences of the nation's unchecked industrialization and imperialism, especially noted in the last two canvases titled Destruction and Desolation. These seem so familiar, right? Such warnings were trumped, however, by epic 19th century canvases that celebrated the American landscape, especially the American West, as uninhabited property and plentiful resource, the fulcrum of speculative real estate and economic development. Artists like Remington and Russell added cowboys and Indians to their Western landscapes, perpetuating myths of gladiatorial combat and vanquished indigenous foes that persist today in the American national imaginary. Quick jump. 20th century American moderns tended to assess the Western landscape on more nuanced terms, driven by subjective experience, new understandings of place, region, and nature, and personal interest in crafting highly identifiable, or what we call signature styles of modern art. Marston partly saw the West as a self-affirming resource. Living in Taos in 1918, invited by art patron Mabel Dodge Lewin, who had moved there a year earlier from New York, Hartley enthused, "I am an American discovering America. I like the position and I like the results." Simultaneously advancing that interwar project of cultural nationalism, forging distinctively American styles of modern art centered around shared cultural beliefs and traditions, Hartley called on other American moderns to embrace what he called the nation's earth voices, writing, "It is America as landscape that invites us to be courageous. America is calling for radical interpretation. Hartley was also a spiritual seeker, and like Cole, 100 years earlier, sought solace and transcendence in certain American landscapes. The pulsating rhythms of this painting corresponded to his interest, in particular in Henri Bergson's concept of élan vital, or vital force, emanating in all life forms, and the ritual drumming and sacred dances of Diné religious ceremonies that he witnessed in New Mexico. And it was interesting to see how Kathy is setting up the Philadelphia Museum's installation with that painting and with various examples of Diné pottery and Navajo weaving in that one gallery. Georgia O'Keeffe also visited New Mexico at the behest of Mabel Dodge Lujan. Beginning in 1929, O'Keeffe spent her first of many summers there, eventually moving to the state permanently. She had an immediate affinity with the landscape, later telling filmmaker Perry Miller Adado, "As soon as I saw it, that was my country. I'd never seen anything like it before, but it fitted me exactly. It's something that's in the air. It's just different. The sky is different, the stars are different, the wind is different." Black Mesa landscape, among her earliest northern New Mexico landscapes, evokes her strong attraction to the region's vast, colorful, and almost otherworldly mesas and mountains, and organization of what she saw into undulating forms and abstract shapes. Another quick jump. Other American moderns depicted the ecological devastation of the American West, the consequences of unrestrained economic conquest and expansion, or what Texas artist Alexander Hogue called man's mistakes. Life magazine devoted several pages to Hogue's pictures in its July 1937 coverage of the Dust Bowl plague ravaging the American West and caused by the magazine clearly stated heat, drought, wind, and the plowing up of grasslands which should never have been plowed, end of quote. During the New Deal artists like Texas artist Jerry Bywaters responded with Western landscapes like this one, which was painted for a post office in Farmersville, Texas, about an hour outside of Dallas. Post office murals that visualize soil conservation techniques like contour plowing. Everything very tidy, everything very ordered. Yet, New Deal pictures of a tamed Western landscape were largely trumped by dramatic scenes of wide open spaces and cowboys, as seen in Maynard Dixon's Cloud Worlds, now in the Denver Art Museum. The rhythmic contours of Colorado artist Eve Drulo's reflected range from 1944, and Thomas Hart Benton's Trail Riders from 20 years later convey the same romantic views of a dramatic and pristine American wilderness. This is the legacy of Western landscape painting. Enduring assumptions about size, scale, and spectacle. Adherence to the myth of a big, endless, and unfettered horizon where cars and cigarettes abound, and cowboys and Indians duke it out just around the bend. The 14 contemporary artists represented in the Eamon Carter's exhibit, New Horizons, the Western Landscape, which is still up and will be up for another week, I believe, reckon with that legacy, reclaiming forgotten or ignored regional histories, recognizing modernity, indigenous presence, and environmental crisis. Diné artists Tony Abeda and Stephen Yazzie draw on lived experience in the Southwest, from the impact of climate change to indigenous understandings of the land as sacred and participatory. Yazzie remarks that he uses color and gestural mark-making as language to reclaim and transform Western landscape narratives into a personal meditation on identity, continuity, and imagination. Don Stinson's Western Landscapes deliberately challenged Moran's Green River views by inserting material evidence of the town's settlement and development. Updating Russell's photograph for the 21st century, Stinson offers us a Western landscape, writes Amy Scott, that is more cyclical, in which natural patterns of human development and decline, settlement, and abandonment play out constantly, making for a landscape of both stability and change. Note the wind turbines on the far left, the airplane contrail, and the towering pylon signs for gas stations and motels on the far right. Likewise, in Green River Embarkation, a nod to where Moran painted and why he was there in 1871 as the artist illustrator on a US government survey of the nation's natural resources. Stinson includes the tiny figure of a surveyor way off on the left. These paintings are really, really big. A power station on the far right, and in the foreground, a mass of fine white powder. No, it's not cocaine. It's soda ash, which is Wyoming's biggest export, used in countless products from beer bottles and toothpaste, detergent, and cat litter. Both historic and contemporary Stinson's Western landscapes speak to the past, but exemplify the present. Inspired by the charts produced by the US Geological Survey and the maps that gas companies used to give out for free to Americans on the road, as well as the impact of the atomic age, which is seen all over the West, Sarah Parchman traces the sites of uranium mining in Gold Leaf and with pigments made from local minerals, asking how we remember what's been taken, what it cost, and what still lies beneath. Alluding to an 1897 USGS topographic map of Yosemite and Bierstadt's Sunrise, Yosemite Valley, from 1870, a mainstay in the Amon Carter's collection of Western American art, Parchman's mural, Lines of the West, undermines conventional markers of the Western horizon with new ways of seeing. The fractalized pattern seen here references the view of the valley that Bierstadt painted in 1870. So finally, refuting the romantic, refuting the ideal, refuting the empty, these artists visualize the new horizons of the Western American landscape. And without further ado, we'll hear from the curator and also from some artists in the exhibit. Thanks.
Thank you, Erica. Oh my gosh, you really can hear me, can't you? I'll try to modulate as best I can. As both Lisa mentioned and Erica did, I'm Andrew Walker, and I was for 15 years until recently the executive director at the Amon Carter Museum of American Art. And I have to say, as an executive director, you don't curate very often, if at all, until I was invited in the last couple of years of my tenure there from the chief curator to take up this idea about what is the contemporary West seen through the eyes of artists practicing in the West. And part of that for me was recognizing the history. What Erica just laid out, you can see on the walls of the Amon Carter, that entire arc of a kind of progressively romantic vision of the American West as being something idealized and in many regards perfect. It's something that really contrasts with the way the West is perceived by artists working there today. And the way that it happened, the thing that I wanted to share was it started here, really, the Carter's history, in that Amon Carter was a large collector of Remington and Russell. And they really epitomized, certainly for him, as a modern man. He really, I won't go into that whole story because it would take up the rest of our time. But he was a very progressive individual in Fort Worth, Texas in his day. And yet he gravitated in his art love towards this romanticized version of a kind of mythic West that really captured the sense of drama and danger within these very imagined separated communities of both Indigenous and Anglo and Hispanic as well. But the notion was the daughter of Amon Carter, who really captured in the collecting since that time in the 1950s, this more romanticized version where they had a notion there that they established as a collecting priority in 1963 around this idea that Bernard DeVoto had proffered in his historical writing called Westering, which was largely that there was always a frontier that America was engaging. And so it gave permission to the daughter of Amon Carter to collect works by Fitzhenry Lane and Martin Johnson Head as representing in Boston Harbor a frontier back in the day. And so all of a sudden the Carter took a different tact, which was in that period of her tenure, 50 plus years as the president of the board and the chief director of the collecting initiatives, that it was a more canonical approach to American art. And yet underneath all of that, even when they collected, as the museum did over its history, the Stieglitz Group in great depth, there was a notion that those works were a continuation of what Remington and Russell proffered in their romanticized version, now moving in, as Erica said, to a much more sort of modernist envisioning where you had still that kind of purity, but a much more dynamic engagement with the land and a diversified engagement with the land, if I can use that word in the context of how it relates to the project New Horizons. And so what the curators wanted me to do as the director who was, holding this legacy for the institution was to really say, what is the American West today for artists practicing? And I'm looking at Alyssa Ford, we were just talking a moment ago, who's the head of the American West Department for Heritage headquartered out in San Francisco, because I would see her on my journeys to within that world of the American West for artists who are understanding the dynamic between a kind of contemporary view and a more romanticized view. And don't get me wrong, that romanticized view is alive and well in the American, and many of the artists practicing and proffering the American West today. But there's a tension there because, of course, there's so much competing views, of which the artists here on the panel will talk about in a moment. But what was important in crafting the exhibition, as modest as it is in scale, the curators wanted me to curate, but they didn't want me to curate too much, is that I had to get out there. And over the course of 2 years, I went to, within the museum world, there are museums very dedicated to the American West that run a kind of operation, whether they're annual sales or exhibitions or promoting the artists to come and participate in their programs at the Briscoe in San Antonio, the Booth Museum in Cartersville, Georgia, the Autry Museum in Los Angeles, the Cowboy Hall of Fame in Oklahoma. It goes on. The C.M. Russell Museum in Great Falls, Montana. This is another museum circuit for which to understand what the narrative is emerging. You had to go and visit and be at their shows, meet the artists, visit the studios, and really I began to understand that it's a very complicated and layered understanding of what the contemporary West is today visually. And then we invited the Carter leadership invited Tony Abeda, who is a Dene artist, as Erica mentioned, who lives in between San Francisco and Santa Fe, to be a guest curator on this project, because it became very clear, and he helped to understand the notion, as many tactics as you could take, cowboy identity, tack identity, in other words, horsemanship. You could unpack the American West in many different ways, but he said the one thing that links the diverse communities that are engaged with the West is the land, because the land speaks to experience both loss and also in a kind of reconciliation. And that became the framework. And what we did as a curatorial team was we wanted to make sure that there was a diverse representation across gender, not using my slides very well, am I? Across stylistic, and certainly a representation of Hispanic, Anglo, and his indigenous voices. So someone like this is on the Anglo side. This is an artist, Michael Scott, who's in Santa Fe, who much in a way similar to but different than what Don Stinson does, is really examining the kind of human interaction with the land as a part of a dystopian narrative that is emerging very, very rapidly, actually, in the American West, whether it is about natural resources or it's about habitation. And these are very large-scale works. And he, as I said, shows very often in Santa Fe. To an artist, Alan Creek, who took the sculptural narrative a little bit differently and really was thinking about the road and what is the detritus of the American West that he would encounter in traveling, the old Route 66 and the tumbleweed cast that now in bronze and patinaed in different colors became a kind of emblematic of his work. And you will see this in museums across his work in museums across the American West. It's become somewhat iconic. To a slightly more traditional and maybe more romanticized version of sculpture, this being called the American Icon by Mick Dolinger, who is a wildlife artist. Again, another lane that many of us in the museum world don't encounter as manifest important canonically or otherwise. And yet it is a huge marketplace, as well as museums that are devoted to the subject matter. And this was to kind of say that there isn't one view or the other stylistically or an eradication of the idea of romanticism in the embrace of aggressive realism, if you want to call it that, which we'll get to. To looking at other issues, this is an artist who's really capturing cowgirls, and her name just flew out of my head, so I apologize for that, but I'll get it in a moment. But she's working with issues around the LGBTQ community. And so it's not only identified ethnically, whether indigenous or Anglo or Hispanic or African American, but also around issues of diversity and gender identity. And we really wanted to make sure that all of those narratives had a place, a platform. But rather than me continue to speak about that, we have two of the creatives here who can really talk about the lived experience, because what I think curious was I got to know these artists to a person, some better than others, but it was important, that connection was important in order to really manifest for the Carter a new vision of the American West that reached back to its legacy. And Don is the first artist who's going to speak. I've had the privilege of knowing Don for a couple of years now, and the privilege of seeing his work in his Evergreen, Colorado studio, although he also has a studio in Austin, Texas. So Don, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. Let me advance this just a little bit. Oh, there I am. First, I'd like to say that I love to talk about painting and how I learned to do it. But today, I'm not going to do that, except to say it was a journey that started at post-minimalist theory, then ran backwards through time, through many wonderful museums. And the Amon Carter, with his spectacular collection of masterpieces, has always been my first love. So I was thrilled when Andrew showed up at my door. So I would also like to thank Andrew and Tony. I'm excited that for putting me in this exhibit. And with that, I will start on this painting. And thanks, Aaron and Lisa, Erica, and thanks, Sarah, for being here with us on this panel. So this painting, Lone Star with Pool, Lobo, Texas, I painted in 2000, and I've often wondered what modern day image best represents the 21st century sublime in landscape painting. Lobo, Texas is a ghost town. The water table dropped and irrigation became too expensive. leaving the remnants of this motel, pool, gas station, and grocery store. I was compelled by this sight of this kidney-shaped pool in disrepair and the little ecosystem coming alive in it. I also thought of Emerson crossing the bare ground of snow puddles on Concord Common. And at the edge of this pool, I wondered, does this represent a modern abyss, a future without water, or is it possibly the mid-20th century transparent eye of God? As you may have noticed, I also get a little nervous when I start to speak, but then it goes away. So we'll just hope for that soon. This painting, Red Billboard and Other Relics of Conquest 2025, the painting offers an imagined New Mexico landscape, which was inspired by drives between Corrales, Santa Fe, and Taos. The Red Billboard was a real presence on my journeys and placed the aesthetic impact of humanity front and center. I love painting the wild horses that live north of Corrales. They kind of hang out along fringes of development in the desert there. And the horses present a beautiful, if unromantic, picture of complexities of life in the West. And I kind of hide them in the brush. You know, they're sort of just lurking around, waiting to see what's going to fall off a truck. You know, they're real characters when you're around them. The next slide, Tonto Basin Shoe Tree. This landscape, I painted in 2016, is as I found it on Highway 87, 2 hours south of Interstate 40 on the way to Phoenix from Holbrook, Arizona. The presence of shoe trees in the West were at first a total mystery to me, but soon became a compelling visual wonder. As I began painting them, I realized that they function as a cairn on a hiking trail, as a marker or signal of extraordinary human experience. Perhaps your hike was so spectacular that you might as well hang up your boots because you can never top it. They might also signal the shifting migratory pattern of international adventurers all around the remote West. Here, we're looking at an installation of another shoe tree, Zion Shoe Tree, west of the park at the Autry Museum of American West in Los Angeles. It's placed next to the photographer Gus Foster's image of tourists in Yosemite, a not uncritical view of the popularity of our national parks, and Mark Kletz's Rephotographic Survey project. If we take a further step back of this installation, we see a very complex and layered presentation of the West cultural history, anchored by Moran's great Colorado picture, Mount of the Holy Cross, and Rose B. Simpson's of Santa Fe Clara Pueblo's Grounded, a monumental ceramic sculpture. This painting, Road to Valentine, and painted in 2013. Here we're looking at the Northwest on the outskirts of Marfa, Texas, as if heading out along Highway 90 towards Valentine, where in 2005, the artist Elm Green in Dragstadt created an art installation designed to look like a product storefront, Marfa, Texas. Many of you probably heard of it. And it was famously, the whole town, Marfa, was famously transformed into an international cultural hub when Donald Judd inhabited and repurposed a disused army base. The motel on the sign is now rough sanded, and the neon has since been rearranged to spell out Stardust Marfa. And marks another, and marks another kind of complex cultural layering along this remote, but somehow cosmopolitan cultural corridor. Wyoming Energy Romance, I painted in 2010. It's another painting where a factual place combined with fictional elements poses a question about the relationship between climate changes, energy priorities, and the impacts of public policy on the landscapes of the West. The wind turbines and coal train in this place are in fact about 30 miles apart. Given recent developments in Wyoming, if I painted it today, I might have to imagine an atomic power plant as well, since they've been recently cleared. Okay, I apologize for this title. It's the longest title I've ever written. Museums hate this kind of thing, I think. But here it is. Questions raised by a foaming sea and the long swim south from Roselle Point. I first painted Robert Smithson's Spiral Jetty in 2000 as it started to reemerge from the Great Salt Lake. The dark basalt rocks were covered in thick salt caps and rose out slowly receding pink brine shrimp-filled water. And that's a mouthful. And it's that way if you get in the lake as well. I returned to 2012 expecting to see the dark piles of rock without their salt caps dry against the white flats. Because of the extended drought, however, heavy snowfall meant, the next year, heavy snowfall meant that the excess water was diverted into the lake. Also, high winds whipped the dying brine shrimp that usually make the water pink into a white sea foam clinging to the spiral outline of the sculpture. I thought it was incredibly beautiful, emerging from Roselle's Point like Botticelli's Venus emerging from the wind-whipped Mediterranean Sea. Today, this sculpture is a clear measure of climate change. The Smithson-Holt Foundation reports that the water is often up to a mile from the edge of the sculpture. This is only 10 years ago, as the lake continues to dry up. The small figures in this painting are long-distance swimmers who once were attracted to the lake water and its buoyancy. Thank you.
Thanks, Don. Our next creative that took part in this exhibition is Sarah Ayala Parchman. I've known Sarah for a long time, and part of the other quality of this exhibition was to look at the artists who lived in the West. Don really coming from both Texas, but the Mountain West, which is a very different than the Desert West for sure. And Sarah has been a Fort Worth resident and somebody who's worked with the museum in her artistic capacity. But she really brought a unique vision because there was a kind of appropriation of the land as explored in maps. And it's a quality of her work that has been consistent, but is evolving as she's looking at some of the subject matter that she'll talk about. But the only other thing I wanted to mention about Sarah's work is it also connects because she does a lot of design in her work, whether it's mandalas or pinstriping. And she is the most noted lowrider pinstriper in Fort Worth, Texas. So I just wanted to offer that as a nuance to her texture. So Sarah, it's all yours.
Thank you for that. Thank you for including me in the exhibition as well. So like Andrew said, much of my work is inspired or it involves maps directly. And I've always been fascinated with maps, I think specifically from living in Texas and the conversation of land and the border and land ownership and what that means around the globe, but especially in Texas, much of my life at least. And I've always seen maps as basically a propaganda tool that's speaking on measuring what in some ways shouldn't or can't really be measured. It's used to divide, to claim, to specifically exclude too, especially in Texas. And so when Andrew approached me about the exhibition, he said, we want you to do a wall piece, a map, but then also to paint a mural. Because I'm also a muralist as well, or I used to be, not so much anymore. And he wanted me to paint the text because pinstriping, car culture, that kind of goes in with traditional sign painting, which I also do or used to do. And I had this idea of using a map to inspire the mural, which I had never really done before. I've only worked with maps specifically as wall pieces. I've never painted with them really like in my mural practice. So I found this geographical survey map, a topographical survey map, which it lets you know the lines of elevation, and it kind of charts for surveyors, trappers, exploring these regions in the late 1800s. And I took a specific portion of the beginning of the Yosemite Valley right there, which would have been a scene that a lot of painters would have painted from that specific site. And so I took part of that, the topo kind of mapping of it, and then I fractalized it. So I just tessellated it into a repeating pattern, and I kind of wanted to blow up the idea of measuring this space of for what would turn into kind of an empirical colonial reason of exploration and to claim and steal, essentially. And so I wanted to kind of fractalize that and blow that idea up and make it more confusing than it already is. And it was kind of a pain to paint. I think I went cross-eyed a few times, but that was my inspiration for the mural. And I think initially we were talking about me painting that wall, and I just wasn't interested in painting letters. I wanted to paint, something related to my practice, which was the map making nowadays. This is my wall piece, Mineral Memory, Atomic Future. And I used 3 different maps for this, and it's mainly about the uranium mining sites in the Southwest during the 1940s and so on. And I really wanted to kind of track and chart I feel like uranium is a relevant topic right now, and that taking of the resource and the intent of what we're trying to do with it, and kind of just track that. And I wanted to use 3 distinctly different maps, starting with the furthest away from us being the furthest away from civilian life. Like we're not going to be using these War Department maps, and that's what that back map is. It's a War Department map from the 1940s to show military scientists where to mine these sites at. And of course, all of these sites just ravaged these towns, these tribal lands. They built them up and then kind of left them to rot, to poison the land. And that's why I love Don's piece in the show, because it's such a literal example of abandonment and what happens when you build something up and for a specific reason, and then you're just done with it and then you leave. Mine's a little more abstract, but that's, yeah. And then the middle map is a geological survey map that I think was given to me by Andrew. Because I work on maps, I'm always given maps. Every birthday, every Christmas, I have a large map collection to choose from usually. And it was a survey that was used to show the levels of what minerals were in that area. And then the top map being a Texaco map, which, it's a road map. It's a daily driver map. So it's something that we used to use every day. And it's still that same idea of wanting to fix the West into these lines that we want to stay still, that we think will stay still. And at least driving in Texas and up and down 35, like those lines are never going to stay still. And so I kind of wanted to have that conversation of how we've lived with this idea of wanting to fix the West into this flat surface that really shouldn't be. And like Andrew said, the Amon Carter has been so meaningful to me and my family over the past years. And I think it's important to note that the history of the collection of Western art in Fort Worth by the families in Fort Worth, I feel like it's all tied together because they were able to do that with their connection to resources of the land, whether that be ranching, horsing, oil. And it's just this cyclical, if it weren't for those museums, I wouldn't have become an artist. And it's this interesting circle, whether it's for the better or, who's deciding that. But yeah, that's all I got to say.
That's great. We have a good 10 minutes left, so you have amazing creatives and scholars and an administrator that you can pepper questions towards, but we'll like to open up to the ground. I wanted to say, can I add one thing to you, Sarah? One of the things that's so intriguing about the mining of uranium is that it has devastated indigenous communities. I mean, the mortality rates and the rates of cancer within reservation communities where a lot of this mining went on is just astronomical. And it's
Yeah, and there were hundreds of those mines, hundreds.
Anyway, are there any questions that you have?
I'm not happy now.
I'm not happy. Yes.
I don't have a question, I have a comment, because in 2000, I was invited out to Jackson, Wyoming to judge Art for the Parks. I had no idea what I was doing, but I liked Wyoming. And when I saw all the art, the Western art, it's so great that you're doing this in New York, because when I saw that art, saw the body of collectors who were so devoted, I said, boy, there are people in New York who have no freaking idea that this is going on. So I think that this is like really so timely now, particularly as we're dealing with climate denials and all that kind of thing. So I just want to thank you. I'm just really pumped. Thank you very much for this panel.
Well, I'll just piggyback on that. And Alyssa and I were talking about this, that it really is a world that has self-sustaining kind of qualities to it that isn't really well known back east. I mean, there's a lot of expectation that we know. And even as an Easterner, I mean, I've lived in Texas now for 16 years, and my understanding of land, my understanding of the contestation that so much of the issues that Sarah and Don brought up, it is a very vital kind of experience that, and I don't mean to say this, go back to what I said before, but having to go to all of these places like Wyoming to really see how artists were interpreting and getting to know was the only way that I could figure it out for myself. And I still am figuring it out. Don and Sarah kind of live it creatively every day.
Yeah, and I would like to say that these are hard subjects, and I feel, and I see this in your work, Sarah, you have to look at them with love. You have to try to love them back to health. Don't look away. Look, face the difficulty, and try to bring it forward with beauty and love. And I think that helps us all. I hope. Other questions?
I just want to thank all of you guys, the artists and the scholars and everyone for, I want to thank all of you guys, scholars, artists, the museum world, for continuing the Western story and not stopping it at Remington and Charlie Russell, who are vital foundations of the Western story, but it's artists like Sarah and Dawn that keep that Western story going, the Western market going, and you guys are awesome. I love that you keep our conversations fluid about what the West means, what the West was, not denying our past, but embracing it and moving forward. So I want to just thank all of you guys. You're amazing.
Can I get you guys to riff on the issue of nostalgia intersecting with a stark fear of the future, which I think is brought to bear mostly in the West, more starkly and evidently than any place else?
Anybody else? Well, I mean, I see nostalgia and sentimental affection for some things that have happened in the past as kind of a way in. People might think, oh, I love that old gas station, or they love that view, but then you put the real stuff in. You put the pecan grove that took all the water. You put you use your imagination and creativity and research and find out what happened, or think about it, and just leave them with that question. So I think nostalgia is all right, but don't leave it there. You know, you want to deliver some real music once you get them in with that.
I mean, the reason I included the advertisement from Marlboro is because that's my West. I love that picture. I won't say anything about cars and cigarettes. And I think that's the picture that so many people have of the American West. But the problem with that picture, of course, is it's not critical, right? Go to the West, smoke some cigarettes, go around that bend. And what I like about the work that we're seeing here is, oh, well, you can go see that, but let's talk about power. Let's talk about, anybody watching Landman season 3? Let's talk about extractive energy. Let's talk about lack of water. Let's talk about uranium mining. These are the facts of life in the West. And I'm always really intrigued by artists who don't stop at nostalgia for the cigarettes and car parts, and those bluffs are so cool, and who recognize that this is a complicated part of modern American, industrial modern American history, and it continues to be so. The majority of our military bases are in the West. I mean, we could go on and on and on and talk about what the West is and what the West does for the American economy. But yeah, don't stop at nostalgia. It doesn't get us very far. So.
Yeah, I would say nostalgia without the education component makes it really dangerous, especially in places like Texas, because it's easy to appreciate old-timey stuff, not realizing what that really meant for the majority of people in communities, past communities, especially in Texas. And I feel like you can't, without that education component, there is no future. It's just repeating of the past, and I feel like we see that a lot too.
And I'll just say one really quick thing, and in the absence of Tony Abeyta being here, is that part of that notion of a complicated nostalgia, which is in a lot of the continuance romanticization, is you get even some indigenous artists, but a lot of Anglo artists sort of freezing indigenous experience in the past. And one of the things that he helped me to understand was there is a land tradition, but there's also part of that land is an urban tradition. And there's a great painting by Craig George in the exhibition that shows a family cooking fry bread under a bridge overpass in Albuquerque. And that, like, to me, just kind of shook me, because there were elements of nostalgic romanticism in that, but it put it into a context that made it that my vision changed, and it came into the present. And Tony, I think, was very insistent that we have that urban narrative, because so many indigenous men and women would leave the reservation to go to cities, and that experience was instrumental in understanding how the land in the West was transforming their lives.
Or just to add to that, the majority of indigenous populations in the West live in cities. I mean, it's urban. They still have attachment to land-based reservations, perhaps. But I mean, again, just trying to blow up these myths that we have about the West and about who's in it or who's not in it. So I just want to say thanks to Sarah and also to Dawn for doing such great work.
I'm going to say one thing. I just like, as a visual and performing artist, I just like to give a shout out to the mightiness of the artwork. There's something that goes beyond the politics in the craftsmanship, looking at the skies, looking at the way you place the paint down, the symmetry and the syncopation, the sheet music that you're doing. That takes me directly to the West or to the Southwest. And so it has a different meaning in the work. Not only does it talk about the politics and the everyday kind of visage of that area, but it talks about the deep soul of the area, and I think your work does that.
Well, thank you all. This has been a lot of fun. And Erica, thanks for being our leader.